Hello, friends. Welcome back. Hope you had a great week. And we will continue our study of the book of Daniel today. We're going to be looking at human wisdom. And to introduce that, I want to tell you about an adventure that I had. My husband and I live on a hobby farm about 5 miles outside of our town, up on a hill. Beautiful view of the valley, by the way, but when it rains pretty hard, water runs through our yard, down the county road, until it intersects with a county road going across. And down there at that intersection, sometimes water runs in faster than it can run away, and we end up with water on the road. This has happened for years, and it's been improved over the last few years. But one day, several years ago, on a Saturday morning, I got up and it was raining pretty hard outside. And I needed to go to town. I had a project to do that morning, and so I had a little Chevy Blazer like this one. 4-wheel drive. I'm invincible, right? So away I went. Drove down the road to the little water at the intersection. There was a little water on the road, but hey, I was sure there'd be no problem. I've driven that so many times I can't count. Drove into town, finished my project. A couple hours later, came out of the building, and it was raining even harder than when I had gone in. But I had a 4-wheel drive. This would not be a problem. I wanted to go home. So I started out and drove along our little county road. Sure enough, there was water on the road. There was more water on the road than when I had gone into town, but I had a 4-wheel drive. I had driven this road many times before. No problem. So I had about 1/8 of a mile, maybe a little less, to cross, and I drove into that water. I did make it, so bear with me here. But I got into drove a little ways and looked out the driver's side window and realized I could see water up onto the body of the Blazer. This was not good. It's supposed to go under. So I drove a little further, and I could begin to feel the Blazer lighten a little bit. And it wasn't floating yet, but I began to realize that might be a possibility. And I began to pray. And I just said, Lord God, I think I should not have driven into this, and I made a mistake. And would you please get me out of this? So I gripped the steering wheel and I drove on, and finally I felt the Blazer wheels settle back down. We pulled it out of the water, turned the corner, I pulled it off to the side of the road so that my heart would slow down a little bit. And I said, Lord, thank you. You have got me out of a mess that I put myself into, and I am sorry. I do want to say I've put some pictures up here. They are of that particular storm. They are not of the water I drove through. Trust me, I kept both hands on the wheel, and I wasn't taking pictures at that point. I did pull off a little later, driving back to my house to get a few pictures, and I wanted to give you an idea of how much water there was, more than I expected. So my wisdom that day was poor. I would classify it under foolish. But I wanted to use that as an introduction into Daniel chapter 2, because we're going to be looking at human wisdom as opposed to better wisdom. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. So let's take a look. Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. One night, during the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such a disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. He called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. As they stood before the king, he said, I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means. Well, in those days, dreams were thought to be possibly messages from the divine realm. It was thought that God sometimes wrote their plans for the world into natural phenomena. Dreams, sometimes even the shape of a rock, or the shape of a cloud, or even the way leaves or branches fell. It took an expert, it was thought, to read the signs correctly to know what the gods had said. So that's why Nebuchadnezzar had this team of experts to decipher messages from the gods. And they all had different expertises, but they were also all expected to explain what the dreams were about. And this dream is an interesting one because Nebuchadnezzar won't tell them the dream. It's possible he doesn't remember the dream, but I think based on some things he says now and later, he's testing them. How can he trust their interpretation if they're not able to tell him the dream? I think that may be his reasoning and his wisdom, if we dare use that word. But let's continue with our story. Verse 4. Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, "Long live the king! Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means." But the king said to the astrologers, "I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means." Now keep in mind the context here. This is probably the middle of the night. These wise men have been called into his bedside, and he wants to know right now, what does this dream mean? Was he looking for an excuse to get rid of all of them? Was he just testing them? We don't know. But this was an impossible demand, outrageous consequences by a king who had no limitations in his power as far as he thought. So let's continue on. Verse 7. They said again, "Please, your majesty, tell us the dream and we will tell you what it means." The king replied, "I know what you are doing. You are stalling for time because you know I am serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means." That's why I say earlier, I believe he remembered it. He is testing them. But again, Nebuchadnezzar trusts his own wisdom, and he intends to learn this dream and also maybe who he can trust. Let's continue on. Verse 10. The astrologers replied to the king, "No one on earth can tell the king his dreams, and no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people." The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. This decree included Daniel and his friends, who obviously were not present at this confrontation. Key point that we will come back to in a little bit is that these wise men said the gods don't live among people. The gods were assumed to give dreams. They know dreams, but they're a long ways off. And we need an interpreter to understand the message. These gods didn't care if they communicated with people. Major contrast with God, who is present. Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them. Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, "Why has the king issued such a harsh decree?" So Arioch told him all that had happened. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Here we see a different kind of wisdom. We see that Daniel responds with wisdom and with tact. Kind of what he did in chapter 1 when he asked for different food during the food test for he and his friends. He asked with discretion, with tact, with wisdom. We'll see that that's something that's constantly attached to Daniel throughout the book. So the king did give Daniel more time than the magicians and enchanters and astrologers. It's an interesting point. Was God giving favor to Daniel? It certainly looks possible. Was Nebuchadnezzar more inclined toward Daniel? That seems also possible, probably through God's favor. And we will see that Daniel is in no hurry to rescue our sleepless king, or to rescue the condemned wise men. Nebuchadnezzar's timing and demands do not take first place for Daniel as he considers this. Let's continue on with Daniel 2:17. Then Daniel went home and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. We see an important phrase here, God of heaven. It's actually used 4 different times in this chapter. The God of heaven. It contrasts with the Babylonian gods who don't live among the people. There's no relationship between those Babylonian gods and humans. A God of heaven tells us heaven is where God reigns. However, we know that there is a connection between heaven and earth, and God has a relationship with humans. So we see here, key point here is that we see Daniel rushing back to find his friends, ask them to pray with him. You may notice that the other wise men, it never crossed their mind to ask of the gods what this dream meant. But Daniel asks of God, and he asks his friends to join him in seeking the God of mercy, who might perhaps this time show mercy to all of them. Would God's mercy save them? So let's continue. That night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. So we see Daniel is given the secret just by asking. Now, that's not a formula, but in this case, we are to learn that these Babylonian gods don't listen, don't show mercy, don't care. In contrast, we see the true God who shows mercy, who listens, who cares deeply. So we see that contrast. And it's a direct answer to verse 11, which when the advisor said, no one except the gods can tell you your dreams, and they do not live here among people. Obviously, God did. He heard the prayer, and he responded. God is accessible. God does reveal things. God revealed the dream and the meaning, and we see where true wisdom comes from, and it comes from God and God alone. It's that simple. It's very simple. An interesting side point that I'm not going to spend much time on, but we see here that God is sovereign over kingdoms of the world. God would be thought to be God of Israel, which would be in Jerusalem and that in Judea. But here we are in Babylon, a long ways away, and God is sovereign over this kingdom and over these dreams as well. He's not just sovereign over believers, he is sovereign over the entire world. But let's continue, because now, once Daniel is given the dream and its meaning, how does he respond? He responds in prayer. So let's look at Daniel 2, verse 20. He said, this is Daniel, he said, praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. Where's the source of wisdom and power? It is God. He has, and notice it's all wisdom and power. Verse 21, he controls the course of world events. He removes kings, sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. Notice the action in these verses. God controls the course of world events. He removes kings, sets up other kings, gives wisdom and knowledge. God is sovereign over the kingdoms of the world. Let's continue on verse 22, and this is a prayer. This is God. He reveals deep and mysterious things, and knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he is surrounded by light. More verbs. He reveals. He knows. Notice what he reveals, deep and mysterious things. These wise men were frantically trying to understand some of the deep and mysterious things, but who knew them? God. Who knew what was lying in the darkness? God. Let's continue verse 23. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we ask of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. Again, notice the verbs. You have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me. You have revealed to us. God is not a God that hides. We will see as we look at the dream next time, the God of heaven, not the Babylonian gods, is a source of wisdom. We see it in chapter 2, and we will see it throughout the book. God raises up kings, he takes them down. He will confuse the wise, give wisdom and discernment to his faithful servants. He will share his wisdom, power, dominion, and glory with humans. Think about that. He shares his wisdom, power, dominion, and even glory with humans. And his kingdom alone is eternal, and to him alone belong power, dominion, and glory, which he shares. That's amazing. Such an incredible contrast with what we've been seeing. Nebuchadnezzar conceals. He refuses to tell. He hides while God is revealing, knowing, and telling. Contrast Daniel with these enchanters and magicians and astrologers. They were fearful. They were unable to ask their gods. They didn't have any knowledge or wisdom. But Daniel, in contrast, asks of God. He receives wisdom, strength, knowledge. Now contrast God with these Babylonian gods. God hears and answers. He reveals mysteries and dreams. Meanwhile, these Babylonian gods are far off, unavailable, don't hear, no point in praying to them. Our wise men just panicked. They did not seek any kind of help from their gods. But Daniel, meanwhile, in contrast, knew God would hear, and he could reveal. Daniel knew that God was wise and strong. What a contrast! And we're seeing this, and that's really part of the point of our story, is a contrast between human wisdom of Nebuchadnezzar and the wise men and the wisdom that Daniel had because of his trust in God, because God is true wisdom. Now, we might say, okay, all in fine and good for them. That was 600 and some BC. We're much more advanced today. We have wisdom. We have power. So I want you to think about the kingdoms of our world today and possibly things that we might put our trust in today. For example, one of them may be political. Do we believe that our government, or a government, can solve the problems of our society? Is our trust in a government, a political entity that can become a god? Is it in science, technology, advancements, education? Do we put our trust in those things? How about financial? Are we trusting in our savings account, in our wealth, in our assets? Or are we trusting that if we had wealth and savings account and assets, then we would be okay? Have you ever thought that your troubles would be over if you just won the lottery? That can be a god. For some people, they think their troubles will go away with pleasure or entertainment, just meeting their desires and their wants. For some people, it's knowing the right people, networking in the right way, creating a personal power. I'll be successful. I'll be fulfilled. That will take care of my problems. There are, of course, more. But what are we trusting in? Even today, are we trusting in our own wisdom? Those things that I just mentioned are based on our own wisdom. Things that we have figured out that can solve our problems. If you're consumed with fear, are your kingdoms letting you down? Who are you trusting? The primary message of chapter 2 is that God alone has wisdom and power, and both are His to give and to take. Those are incredible words for us in difficult times. Our times are no more difficult than the times of Daniel. He was displaced in a strange land with capricious kings who could do whatever they chose based on whatever wisdom they felt like at the moment. But yet we see God interacting in the life of Daniel as we move through the following chapters. And it's a powerful lesson for us. God is here today. There's nothing here that is more powerful than our God. And that's good news. Thanks for being with me. I will continue next time, and we will look at the dream and its meaning. I hope you have a wonderful week, and God bless.